Hi, I'm Tony DeLibero, lead programmer on Stronghold Warlords at Firefly Studios.
So, Tony, I actually talked to your team last year at PAX, which seems like forever ago. How much progress have you made on the game since then?
Oh, it's been a ton. If you're talking about PAX East, then I was there too. And it was a really fun show, and we had a lot to show at that point. But since then, we've been really hard at work at finishing up the game, having had a lot of the core systems kind of taken care of at that point. We've been building all the missions and tweaking the new systems and continuing to refine the Warlord system.
So then talk about what are some of the challenges when making an RTS today? Because it's a genre that it's still around, but it kind of dwindled out. You don't see as many of them as you did, in the early 2000s or mid 2000s.
Yeah, I think the genre largely evolved into multiple genres. So you get MOBAs for the people who like the kind of hero-based, more reactive gameplay, and you get more high strategy games and kind of the turn-based stuff, or the Total Wars for people who like the more drawn-out, huge battles. So I think it's just kind of diversified. But our grounding is still firmly in the traditional type of RTS that we started with Stronghold 1 about the year 2000. And that would be your traditional kind of build a base, have a strong, in our case, castle and city simulation element where you have to raise crops and set your popularity and control your popularity via tax rates and feeding the populace. But at the same time, you have to create castles, man the walls, and actually command people around. So I think the place for this genre has been there. It's just there haven't been as many games that are specifically in the old style like we do.
Now you guys have both a single player and a multiplayer. Talk about some of the challenges when balancing those modes together, because there's some stuff in single player that could be really fun, but just the mechanics don't transfer over well when you're fighting with a real person online.
Yeah, so because we have such a heavy sim element, a lot of what you're doing in both single and multiplayer is just managing your own base. But the challenges come in where in our campaigns, we have a storyline and we have missions, and they kind of progressively increase the difficulty and reveal game systems and game units and all that. Whereas in multiplayer, you're just kind of thrown in the mix with everything like you would be in a single player skirmish mode game that we have. So in those cases, we have to balance things so that not only will another player have fun destroying your base, but you'll also have fun defending it, and it'll feel fair to both players. And in addition to that, we need AI to be at least as competent as people, feel that way at least, and be fun to compete against when you don't have friends to play with. In our case, this time for Warlords, we've added, on top of our older Stronghold traditional estate system, we have this concept of these warlords who are autonomous factions that exist on the map, and you vie for control of them with the other players. So there's a strategic layer where you see the strategic warlords map on top of the kind of more moment-to-moment RTS tactical layer and the city building. You're also vying for control of these warlords because they provide valuable bonuses and they can do things for you. They follow your commands. And the way you can get them is either via military might, by cowing them and taking out the warlord with your military forces, or by harnessing diplomacy points via embassies and using those diplomacy points to gain favor with the current warlord. You can actually bring them under your control that way as well. So we think that kind of back and forth for players will be really fun, a high strategy layer on top of the traditional RTS beatdown.
And when I played your game at PAX West, it was a cross between. I felt it was a cross between StarCraft 2 and Civilization. You had those same elements in Civilization, but it wasn't just pure tile-based tactical stuff. You had real-time combat.
Yeah, exactly. So our whole goal with this was to keep that RTS feel and the fact that you can grab one archer or 50, right? And have it feel when you order them around that you're either playing Total War or Warcraft 3, or whatever in the moment when you're actually doing it. Age of Empires, our original Strongholds, that same heritage. But in order to be effective, you also have to actually run your castle. You have to feed your populace. You have to bribe them or motivate them with torture equipment, or do things to keep them happy so that they'll stick around and man your village. And you have to run your economy while you're doing all this, and build a castle. You have to actually design your walls, lay them out, put troops up on the walls, move your guys into towers for better range and better defense, and deal with siege equipment assaulting your walls at the same time. So we have a much more walls we can actually walk on in our game, and you build the castle towers and connect them and all that in a way that you don't really see in other series. And that's kind of our niche right there.
Yeah, as a programmer, obviously a lot of games are first person or third person, but when you're working with an RTS, are there any like specific challenges to you from a programming level that you have to tackle when making an RTS compared to like a first person or a third person game?
Yeah, their RTSs are unique in their demands on a game engine, for example. So most game engines have their roots on either simpler games or certainly things like FPSs, Unreal and the like. Those engines all focus around showing, several dozen actors on the screen at once, maybe. We're dealing with tens of thousands of moving objects, and what's more is we have to sync them over the network. So multiplayer coding, companies that kind of make an RTS and then think, oh, we'll add multiplayer later, are in for a nasty shock when they find out exactly what means you have to go to actually make it work. And I think the biggest programming challenge is from the ground up, doing what you need to do to make the multiplayer work, because you can't send these tens of thousands of things back and forth over the network constantly. It's just not viable. And in our case, we don't have fog of war in our game, so we have to send all the objects all the time. So we actually rely on something called lockstep and determinism. And most RTSs traditionally have used that technique, where everybody's machine is simulating the game, and you only send commands that each player issues, and then you execute them at an agreed upon moment, hopefully imperceptibly fast for the players. But that's a huge challenge. And then just rendering tens of thousands of actors on the screen sometimes can be a huge technical challenge, and engines aren't made for that. So you always roll your own stuff on top of whatever you have.
How have advances in technology over the years? I mean, because we're NVIDIA just announced their RTX 380 line, 370 line. How's that helped you make your game a reality in terms of like programming and coding and stuff like that?
Well, certainly we have a lot more flexibility in how many things we can draw on the screen, and we have a lot more ability to do graphic effects that were out of reach before. So for example, we can take the whole screen and do all kinds of post-processing effects on it now, thanks to modern video hardware and shader tech. That was just not happening, even 5-10 years ago to the same degree. And we're not bleeding edge engine creators by any measure, but we take full advantage of knowledge of modern techniques where we can, and we implement them in our engine, especially for the graphical effects. And just for the sheer numbers of things, we can always push more units into the game, or more animations, or more things going on the screen with particles and the like, the more this advances, because the video tech is doing it for us under the hood, and we just can send more at it now.
Now, I feel like there are pros and cons to using your own engines. Of course, when you're using Unity or Unreal, which are two of the biggest engines, you have that support window, that support floor, that if you run into a problem, you can reach out and say, hey, having this problem, and they can help you. But when you have your own engine, you almost have to do the problem solving entirely yourself with no help, and you have to start on the ground level. What's that like?
It's very challenging to not have a forum. We've programmed in Unity. Our company does some games in Unity, and we're used to being able to look on forums and see how people have solved problems, and we don't have that for our own in-house engine. What we can do is we can look at similar solutions from other engines, and we can carry them over. But more so at this point, the engine is that we're using now is largely just all in-house work from either former or current programmers. So we have a high degree of familiarity with it, and we're mostly able to just focus on improvements, especially on the graphical front. My colleague Matt, the graphics programmer, has done a ton in that regard. And in terms of actually getting things like deep tech problems solved, I think we've covered most of the bases for what we're doing now. But we're certainly looking at other engines in the future, because we would like to move past some things that we're still doing, and take advantage of other people's hard work on things like animation tech and just multi-threaded coding and all that.
Now, when people look at game development, they tend to usually focus, especially with consumer level, they tend to focus on the art and the graphics, because that's what you visually can see, right? but as a programmer and coder, what's the biggest misconception about your job in game development?
Well, that's a good question. I think especially a smaller company like ours, most of us wear a lot of hats. So I can work as programming lead. I'll do a lot of the deep engine tech and that kind of thing, and so do the other coders. But we are also doing things like all the gameplay programming, and in my case, I do a lot of the UI layout and animations as well, and a lot of the assistant audio stuff for our composer Rob Uvino. I do the tech code to get that in. I think the main thing is in games, in a bigger company, you may find enough staff to have specialized work. Whereas in a smaller company, you tend to have to kind of holistically approach the whole game and be able to work on any system and understand the workflows of your coworkers. And this goes for artists and designers as well. The better you understand your peers' workflows and how they have to get things done and what their motivations are and why they have to do certain things certain ways, the more of a grasp you have on it. So I think people often don't realize that game programmers are often at least have a working knowledge on how to do the art and all that. They just don't necessarily have any talent in it. So and I would say the same for the artists too. They go above and beyond with their technical chops, in order to meet programmers halfway and to use the bizarre tools we concoct for them and all that.
I think that's the difference between like a smaller team and a bigger team, right? Bigger team, like you said, you have departments. You have an entire department dedicated to UI, and then you have like an entire department dedicated to art, tied to netcode. But now in a smaller team, you have to do multiple things, and you have to learn how to do them quickly and on the fly because you're a team of like 8 people, not 800.
Yeah, it seems like the buck always stops with you. So yeah, everybody has to like bring it, and step up. But my coworkers, we all revel in it. Like we really enjoy being polymaths and having to approach all these different tasks, even if it wasn't in, say, your job description. 1 week a coder might be working on memory allocations or optimizations, and then the next week they have to like artistically make a mortar ball bounce around off of walls and that kind of thing. So it gets really interesting in terms of not knowing what's coming up apart from the broader schedule. You might be working on very diverse things.
Yeah, I have a friend who codes, and he loves, he always talks about the problem-solving aspect. That's what it's all about. It's like you compile the code, you find an error, and you got to problem solve. Why isn't this working? And that's what it is every day.
Yep. Yeah, very much.
So can you talk about like how we talked about this before the interview a little bit? Can you talk about how the COVID and the stay-at-home orders have affected the development of this game in particular, if they have at all?
I think we were fortunate in that our small company having the London and the Connecticut office in the States, and we have a bunch of community managers and other people spread out, and we have our QA department in Scotland and Aberdeen. We were already used to working that way, and in fact, I'm the programming lead on this project, and the other programmers are all in London anyway. And in fact, I think only Eric is in the States with me, who is working on this game. So as it was, I would do a lot of, we did everything via Skype for the last decade or so, right? So we're used to that. The main change is now we don't have this office camaraderie, right? Everybody's had to uproot from their respective offices and move into their dens or whatever. So now we use, especially Discord, we have just little chat rooms we can all pop into and talk with. And this is, my colleagues thought this up. They made kind of just different areas for different kinds of conversations. And we can freely go in and out and just keep running conversations with the whole company. And it's super good for us because there are maybe 30 or so of us all told, and on this project, maybe 10. So just being able to talk to any of them at any time in kind of a casual way is great.
Now, how does the time difference factor into your workday? Because like when you're starting your day, anyone on BST is ending their day. So does that mean that you wake up and you see all the notes from the days of work and go kind of through them all and like fix stuff, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. The main risk is that you break something before you go to bed, and then the people in London have to deal with it for the first half of their day, right? Or vice versa. But in our setup, as a programmer, I love it because I get about half the day where no one bugs me and I can just work on whatever I want to focus on. In the first part of the day, you're right, it does consist of chatting with people and coordinating anything I'm collaborating on, or giving feedback or getting some, and generally doing our meetings in the morning for my time and for the afternoon for their time. Yeah.
So I want to talk about something. Whose idea was the exploding cows in your game? Because that stuff is great. Because a lot of games, you know, they like to root themselves in history or be historically realistic, but at the same time, a game has to be fun, or else it's not fun to play. So whose idea was the exploding cows?
I would credit Simon for choosing to do it. He's our main designer. One of the original Stronghold creators. Him and Eric made it back in 2000. He took that idea. However, the ancient Chinese actually thought of that. There's at least one famous picture that depicts it, and there's a documentation of basically lighting oxtails on fire and having them run in as terror weapons to stampede into the enemy in at least one battle. And we kind of took that and ran with it and put a strongholdy twist on it that's analogous to our old trebuchet diseased animal flinging, which I'm happy to report we do have in this game as well.
See, look, you learn something new every day. I did not know that was actually a thing. Even if it was just done a couple of times, it's actually rooted in history. Did not know that.
As I recall reading the design document, Simon had a note on the bottom. He's like, these are a real thing that was actually done, believe it or not. And we're all like, huh.
That is insane. So, when does this game come out? Like, has it been delayed from COVID? Are you guys still working strong on it? Do you have a set release date for it?
Yes, we did push it back because we were disrupted enough to have to actually spend some more time on it to get it where we want. But we're looking at January, and the actual release date slipping my mind, but it is in January. And we're making very good progress. The game is in a very polished state at the moment, and we're going through and doing final balancing on all the missions and generally squashing bugs and refining elements, adding a lot of what we call the Wusel factor, or the Germans call it, but it's the kind of life in the village sort of stuff that's really strong on the simulation end of what you see. So the villagers walking around and milling about and going to places and talking to each other, and the effects of doing things like having too many torture buildings on the populace and that kind of thing.
And then do you have, right now you're PC only, do you have any plans for a console release, PS4 version or 5, Xbox, Nintendo Switch?
We have no announced plans for anything like that at the moment.
Awesome, Tony. And where can people find more information about your game? And more importantly, where can they go to support it?
Well, we're already on Steam. You can wishlist us. You should find all the information about the game there. And of course, Firefly Studios has its own website you can check out. But you can link there. If you check out the Steam page, you'll see everything you might want to know about Warlords. Add it to your wish list if you're interested, and keep tabs on our development progress.
Yeah, and wishlisting, guys, does really help the studio. So do wishlist it if you're interested. It really does actually help them out on a huge level.
Yeah, it really helps us gauge interest in the game and just knowledge of who wants to play and that kind of thing, and what our fan base is going to look like going into the beginning of the game, so we know we can best support it after release.